The following WCIA3 News special presentation is sponsored by these caring companies. We salute the achievements, the creativity, and those who make a difference. WCIA3 is honoring Black history.
Here at WCIA3, we are celebrating Black History Month by highlighting people focused on making positive change in the community. But before we look forward, we want to look back. Good evening. I'm Paul Cicchini.
And I'm Jennifer Roscoe. Where there's Black history, there's the church. From the arrival of the first enslaved people on native soil in 1619 to the present, churches have served as safe spaces, a source for organizing, and a community hub. In Champaign, Bethel AME was the first church among many to provide this for Black Americans in town. Its story, like that of many Black Americans, is wrapped in a struggle for equality that spans across generations. WCIA3's Jared Farmer has more.
In 1863, Bethel AME came to Champaign. It was the city's first Black church. Pastor Terrence Thomas says the church has worked to uplift voices that are otherwise unheard.
One of the things the AME Church was always known for is being a social justice church. It's in the DNA. It's founded in protest. It's founded in its roots for freedom and equality. And so that's kind of how Bethel is. Bethel is known as the mother church. Bethel is the mother church of this area. And so if there's a Black congregation in this area, it came out of Bethel.
Those roots are found everywhere around Champaign-Urbana. Bethel AME's senior members say the church has been more than just a staple. Since its founding, the church has provided community outreach, activism, and remained a safe space. The community hub stands out as a major part of its history.
No justice, no peace.
Today, the church still remains a platform for activism. Over the summer, Bethel AME collaborated with HV Neighborhood Transformation, an activist group in Champaign-Urbana. It has a mission to condemn police brutality and end cycles of community violence. One of its founders, William Brown, says the church is just as important to political activism as it always has been. He says Bethel AME's spiritual leadership helped guide their movement forward.
Bethel AME and Pastor Thomas is like, for me, and I'm pretty sure I can speak for everyone at HBNC, the beacon of what that should be. Because if we study our history and we walk through our history, every change or every social change or social activism was spearheaded by the church.
Over the last year, the spread of coronavirus has drastically changed the nature of church services across the country, including for Bethel AME. But Pastor Thomas says he sees the situation as an opportunity to grow. He says the church is just as determined as ever to carry out its spiritual mission. In Champaign, I'm Jared Farmer, WCIA3, your local news leader.
The church is celebrating Black History Month with a series of specials talking about faith, politics, and racial justice. Now, the city of Champaign and the Museum of the Grand Prairie of Muhammad are shining a spotlight on the faces behind a few firsts this month. This is Taylor Thomas. In 1956, he became the first Black teacher in the Urbana School District. Champaign's Taylor Thomas subdivision is named in his honor. And meet William W. Smith. He became the first Black graduate of the U of I in 1900 and was the first editor of the Illini newspaper.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s death shocked the country in 1968 during an already tense time of racism. That tension could also be felt on the U of I's campus, where Black students were feeling overlooked. WCIA3's Alyssa Franklin tells us how Dr. King's death sparked a movement for them.
Connie Eggleston was always a good student growing up in Chicago.
I was number 10 in my class over 200 and some people. So I wasn't a dummy. I was pretty smart.
When it came to deciding what was next after high school, she wanted to model. Her brother encouraged her to go to college instead, anywhere but the University of Illinois, where he was a student.
This place is kind of bad. It's kind of prejudiced. It is less than 2% Blacks here, over 32,000 whites and less than 1% Black.
Eggleston decided to go anyway and became a student in 1966.
Every time I'd write a paper, they'd write red all over. It's like they were really wanting to flunk you out. They wanted to make you sure you didn't graduate the way I felt about it, you know, because I knew how to write.
She left the university because of the unfair treatment and racism she experienced. She transferred to a junior college. Her brother stayed on campus. That was until Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was killed in 1968.
When Martin Luther King was assassinated, they marched to the campus.
And to the chancellor's office demanding more diversity.
We need more black students down here.
Those students went back to their hometowns and recruited who they could. They came back with more than 500 students in what we know today as Project 500. One of those was Eggleston, but the university wasn't prepared to handle the influx.
They were living in what we call back then the ironing board rooms, where you iron your clothes and stuff like that, and the student lounge. They didn't have any place to stay. A lot of them went back home.
The students again asked the school for help, but they were arrested instead.
We sat in a union building waiting for the chancellor to come, and he didn't send the chancellor. They sent the dogs and arrested all of us.
They were released the next day, and slowly black students started to be treated better. But when days were still difficult, the Afro-American Cultural Center was there for them.
I felt better. I saw more black students, and I could relate to them. And I remember my first set of grades, my counselor looked at my grades and said, "Boy, look at your grades. You're just really getting all these A's and B's. What's going on?" I said, "Well, I feel better."
Since the 60s, the Cultural Center has been a safe haven for black students on campus. And even today, it is still home away from home.
They have Food for the Soul on Wednesdays where we can get food and talk about topics that pertain to our community.
Today, students like Taylor Howard know one thing for sure. Being with others is better than standing alone.
It's just been amazing just to see and be a part of the black community because when no one else got us, we got us.
Both Taylor and Connie walked campus together in a recent reunion. Although she says it brings back some bad memories, she's grateful to see a change from when she was first there. U of I's Cultural Center still serves not only black students, but students of all backgrounds. Today, it bears the name of one of its directors, Bruce Nesbitt. Born and raised in Champaign-Urbana, he became a Champaign police officer in the 60s, the second black officer in the city. Though he made the paper for solving one of the biggest crimes in that time, he left to help people in a more personal way. He ended up at the U of I and helped students during a racially tense time, even housing them as if they were his own. Nesbitt's daughter works as the chief clerk for the center today. She's glad she can continue his legacy.
Growing up, after school, I would always come to the building. Daddy was just like the babysitter after school, so I would come every day. It was condemned. It was, so for me to see the before and after, to saw where he literally started from humble beginnings all the way to now, it makes me teary-eyed, but I know he's smiling, I know he's happy, and so for me, the mission still goes on, but for the most part, it's been complete.
The center's doors aren't open because of the pandemic, but they still serve students in virtual events.
Bronze medallions have been placed across cities in one state. How one man is looking to uncover the truth of slave history, one QR code at a time.
Plus, it was a community filled with thriving businesses in the 1900s. The famed Black Wall Street ended up in ruins.
Honoring Black history continues now.
We often hear about successful black Americans creating and running business enterprises. You might say it's part of their DNA if you consider what happened more than a century ago in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
A small community there had many successful black entrepreneurs. As we observe the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre, Donna Terrell shows us what happened to Black Wall Street.
Tulsa, Oklahoma. A city diverse in its people and culture, fueled by a complicated past, some of which involves the historic Greenwood District, better known as Black Wall Street, a community of prominence and wealth for black people in the early 1900s.
You could go down to the Greenwood Avenue, which is really the hub of what was called Black Wall Street, and find restaurants and grocery stores and movie theaters and taxi cabs and haberdasheries and furriers, but also doctors, lawyers, pharmacists, dentists.
Many of the people who came to Indian Territory, Tulsa, the Greenwood, what we know as also Black Wall Street, had received their educations back, particularly in the East, at Morehouse and Spelman and Howard University. So they were professional people with professional skills.
Black Wall Street's founding father, Ottawa Gurley from Pine Bluff, Arkansas, arrived in Tulsa in 1906.
He came here already having wealth.
He opened a grocery store and bought and sold land to other black people. Businessman Simon Berry ran a taxi and bus service and owned a chartered plane company catering to rich oil men.
It was said that each dollar changed hands 19 times before it left the community.
Black people living the American dream, but a volatile situation loomed.
This was a really dark time. This is a period during which events that were called race riots were happening all throughout the United States.
Greenwood, a fertile field for tension between blacks and whites.
If one embraces this notion of white supremacy, and one can look across the railroad tracks and see a very successful black community with people owning homes, driving cars, wearing nice clothes. If you're a white person and you're not doing well economically, then something is amiss. The ship has to be essentially righted.
The trigger, an encounter in the Drexel Building elevator in downtown Tulsa between teenagers Dick Rowland, a black shoeshine boy, and Sarah Page, a white elevator operator.
Something happened that we don't know exactly what.
Page said she was assaulted, though she later recanted, but a local newspaper embellished the story, adding fuel to the fire. Out of fear Rowland would be lynched, armed black men came to the jail to protect him. They were met by a larger group of armed white men. Then, a gunshot.
And as one of the massacre survivors says, all hell broke loose after that.
An angry white mob set Greenwood on fire. The entire community burned, totaling 35 city blocks. The popular Dreamland Theater gone. More than 1,200 homes, 600 businesses, and the famed Wall Street left in ruins, as were a number of churches.
And all this happened in only 18 hours.
Reverend Robert Turner pastors historic Vernon AME Church, where only the basement survived the massacre.
It was the first time airplanes were used to terrorize Americans. Not 9/11, not Pearl Harbor, but right here in Greenwood, in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
It's estimated between 100 and 300 people, mostly blacks, were killed and many others wounded. Some of the survivors, including Gurley, left and never returned. After the massacre, the people who stayed here rebuilt Greenwood. In fact, in the 1940s, it thrived with well over 200 documented black businesses. Ironically, it was integration that led to the demise.
When integration comes along and black people are able to spend outside the community, they're able to access more goods and services at better price points, it undermines the financial foundation of the community.
Another blow. Urban renewal in the 60s, where the city would buy up or condemn some homes and businesses. It also brought Interstate 244, which barrels right through the heart of Greenwood.
It had really a devastating impact.
Today, there are some businesses on Greenwood Avenue, but Vernon AME Church is the only property still entirely black-owned. A ballpark and Oklahoma State University Tulsa occupy a huge chunk of land where homes once stood. But the community's rich history teaches us many lessons, including the power of the human spirit and the notion that some history bears not repeating.
You know, I typically would paraphrase something that Dr. Maya Angelou said that I think is both simple and profound. She said, our history, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived. But if faced with courage, it need not be lived again.
And need not be forgotten. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, Donna Terrell reporting.
For nearly 95 years, that event was referred to as the Tulsa Race Riot. That way, insurance companies wouldn't have to pay to rebuild the businesses that had been destroyed. It was only within the past few years that an effort was made to rename the event to more accurately reflect what took place.
An innovative project is shining a light on the hidden history of Rhode Island. Slave medallions are being placed throughout the state. marking the role each city played in the triangular slave trade. Slaves were captured from their tribes in Africa, brought to ports in Rhode Island, and then used in the process of creating rum. A QR code on each medallion takes people to a website revealing each city's use of slave labor.
It's a hidden history. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to tell the unvarnished truth about slave history.
He plans to take this project into the classrooms next.
He was a college standout who made it to the NFL.
How a former linebacker found his higher calling in his community.
And the NFL player in the prime of his career walked away from the game to follow what he says is his true calling, educating and empowering the youth in black communities.
Amanda Lee introduces us to Aaron Mabin and his journey from linebacker to activist.
Aaron Mabin was born, raised, and to this day lives in Baltimore.
You know, I just want to see, you know, the city be a city that the world loves as much as I do.
Blessed with exceptional talent, Aaron landed at Penn State University, where he excelled on the field. But just years after his selection as an NFL first-round draft pick, he made a stunning decision.
From a very early age, I saw myself as way more than an athlete.
He traded in his helmet and cleats for paintbrushes and a fresh canvas with no regrets.
I said if I were to drop dead tomorrow, and the greatest thing somebody could say about me was that, you know, he was a damn good football player. And I wasted a lot of time in my life.
Aaron's true life's calling was just beginning.
You talk about reforming or changing any society, it starts with the youth. It starts with the investment that we're making in our youth.
Mabin started the Project Mayhem Foundation more than a decade ago with a simple mission: to help underprivileged and at-risk youth excel.
You know, some of my students are, you know, not even in 3rd or 4th grade, but they're in charge of getting 4 or 5 of their younger siblings to school every day. You know, when you're walking through the projects, you're walking through open-air drug markets, you know, at the crack of dawn, you know, people get robbed, people get shot, people get stabbed. It happens every day.
He works directly with children, educating, inspiring, and showing young black children their value is endless through art.
I'm intelligent. I am a listener. I am a learner. I am beautiful.
It's an opportunity he's never taken for granted.
I am smart. Until I saw, you know, an educator that looked like me, I didn't think that they existed. Not that you're ignorant enough to think that it couldn't exist, but you don't know what it looks like.
And his work extends beyond his own foundation.
What's the day been like for you guys today?
Very cold.
Very cold. You guys are cold.
The wildly successful Operation Heat fundraiser raised more than $82,000 to help warm Baltimore's classrooms.
So many of the parts of our educational process invalidate our kids' livelihood, invalidate their lived experiences, and it invalidates their humanity.
Aaron's artistic tapestry has expanded beyond boundaries of Baltimore, his workbooks being taught in more than 24 school districts across the country.
And I always wanted my work to be something that little kids that, you know, grew up where I grew up, that looked like me, saw themselves reflected in, saw their complexions, saw their hairstyles, saw their history reflected back at them.
In Baltimore, Amanda Lee reporting.
Mabin's implementing those same lessons in his own children. He has 3 and just welcomed a newborn in December.
A radio personality is using his platform to stand up for the black community.
Why he's chosen to speak up.
Leaders in Decatur are encouraging young people to make a difference in their community.
They're hoping together they can build a better future. WCIA 3's Jamie Mace has more.
Terrence Taylor has 4 goals when he comes into work.
Educate, to include, to motivate and inspire.
And he uses his platform to do just that.
I want to make sure that I'm a representative to all those young black and brown kids who I didn't get to see those leaders when I was growing up, so I want to be that leader.
Taylor, also known as Tat, is 34 years old and from Decatur. He's an instructor at Richland Community College, mentor, and radio personality. And he doesn't hesitate to get on the microphone and speak about issues he thinks matter most.
First and foremost, Black Lives Matter, social justice, racial equity.
Taylor is a part of a much larger group in Decatur. Adults, some fresh out of college, others are students who are active in the community and using their voices to inspire youth.
Young people are our future. They're going to be the ones who are going to make a difference.
Dominique Bates-Smith helped form a group called Walk It Like We Talk It last year. They have done a Walk to the Polls event, a Black Lives Matter honor drive, and are constantly finding ways to help those in need.
I believe that talk is great, but it's kind of cheap. You have to actually get out there and make things happen.
They say while the work isn't easy, it's worth it.
That's not enough for us just to be doing what we're doing. We have to include the young people and be able to pass the baton.
Jamie Mays, WCIA3, your local news leader.
They're hoping more young people will find ways to become more active in the community.
And thank you for joining us tonight to honor the triumphs and struggles of Black Americans throughout history.
We hope you learned something about the history in your own backyard, but there are many more pieces of history out there. You can find more of them on WCIA.com.
Have a good night.
Honoring Black history has been brought to you by these caring companies.